I wanted to touch on a bunch of instances recently of just like really vitriolic anti-trans rhetoric, which has gone so far to even cause a divide at the Daily Wire, where somebody's actually pulling out of the Daily Wire because it's gone too far, that there are people who work for them, like Michael Knowles here, have gone too far in the rhetoric. I'm going to start with this Michael Knowles clip, which is the most notorious of all the clips we're going to be watching today, all the stuff we're going to be reading today. Going through these clips quick. And Michael Knowles is speaking at CPAC. So I didn't actually watch much of CPAC this year. I don't know if it was just because CPAC was particularly boring this year, or there's just not really many good speeches. Like, I disagree with them, of course, but that doesn't mean CPAC can't be interesting. It could still be silly or interesting or have another reason to motivate me to watch it. It just was not that good, so I didn't watch it. So I missed this until it was posted online. And so Michael Knowles is most well known in left-wing spaces for his extremely transphobic opinions, and he decided that he was going to conjure up one of the most hateful things he could possibly say it on the national stage at CPAC, at the Conservative Political Action Conference, which did get some applause, but went so far that you can even see some in the audience kind of feel kind of like they're taken aback. They're not clapping. They don't know how to react to what he just said. So here's the abbreviation, and we're going to play the clip. There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. Let's listen to the clip.
There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing. If transgenderism is true, if men really can become women, then it's true for everybody of all ages. If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really can't become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everybody too. And if it's false, then we should not indulge it, especially since that indulgence requires taking away the rights and customs of so many people. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
So look at this crowd. You see some people who are really passionate, really clapping. It looks like 50-50 in the crowd. People who are clapping or not clapping in reaction to that. It seems like some of them even notice that, like, this is really far. This is really bad. So the first thing is, he says that this is just mental confusion. They've just been led astray. Trans people have existed for a very, very, very long time. There are medical records that go back. We can go back to Weimar Germany. We can go before that. By the way, the medical records of Weimar Germany and trans people, they were burnt and destroyed during the book burnings that the Nazis engaged in. And one of the things that the Nazis really, really tried to clamp down upon was sexual studies in Germany, which included putting trans women in concentration camps. Now, obviously, he's not saying put trans people in concentration camps, well, publicly, as far as I know. But when he's talking about like erasing them from like the public space entirely, when Vosh talks about like the trans genocide question, right? I think sometimes he gets a little hyperbolic, but when it comes to this statement, like, this is as close as we've seen like a high profile American political figure hired with like a more semi-mainstream publication like the Daily Wire get close to that type of rhetoric, if not really starting to touch it with his fingertips. I mean, so first off, trans people have existed for a very long time. It's not like TikTok just invented them all, right? Whether or not you're going to say that the environment has changed and it's made more people trans, I guess you can make that assertion if you want to. You need to back it up with evidence and proof and some studies first, which we have yet to see. But you cannot say that it just like randomly popped out of nowhere. It's something that has existed for a long period of time across multiple cultures spanning the globe. That's the first thing. Second thing, as far as I was aware, conservatism was about freedom. conservatism, to some extent, from the way it was always pitched to me, is not just about conserving the institutions and the you know, Bill of Rights and all these things, but it's also like the government needs to leave us alone. The government gets in everybody's business. But he's talking about going out there and pushing away all of these people from public life, taking these people and saying, you cannot display this in public, you cannot be this in public, not promote this in public. This is the type of rhetoric that you would hear before they pass the anti-gay propaganda laws like they did in Russia, which banned any positive representation of being gay, which banned gay people from not only participating in children's media, but also participating in any media, period, as long as they're not the butt of the joke and it's not, oh man, he's gay, that's evil and bad. This is the type of rhetoric that we heard in Russia before they tried to push that type of legislation. It's like the exact same. There's no different. What Michael Knowles is saying is no different than what a Russian nationalist would say when trying to defend Vladimir Putin's crackdown on homosexuals. Eradicate them from public life entirely. And his justification for this comes from two places. The first place, he said, was out of concern for the people who have been led astray. Again, he would need to prove that not only these people have been led astray, but that they've been led astray for thousands of years, for hundreds of years, across multiple cultures. Okay, that's the first thing. Second, and also that all these doctors, all these people who have demonstrated gender dysphoria are all just wrong. That they all got it wrong. All these medical institutions, all these respectable doctors, they all got it wrong. Michael Knowles himself got it right. And then there's the second point. He says that by allowing transgenderism to even be in the public space, it by its very nature tramples on the rights of others. How? How does it trample on the rights of others? And even if that was true, that what he was saying, that it somehow trampled on the rights of others, his answer to that would still just be, well, instead of having them trample on our rights, we're just going to trample on their rights. So in his world, in this thing that he's concocted in his head, rights are being trampled on no matter what. It's either going to be us because we have to let the trans people in the women's bathroom sometimes, or it's going to be them. So it might as well just be them. If you talk to trans people, the vast majority of trans people aren't like, oh, I want to trample on the rights of straight people. I want to make straight people uncomfortable. I want to make cis women uncomfortable. Of course not. Most people just want to live their life and go about their daily life. The people you see on Twitter, right, or TikTok, putting out wacky takes you've never seen before, are not the majority of people in the real world, right? I think everybody needs to go out and touch grass a little bit, and I think Michael Knowles is on that list as well. His argument is basically, we need to trample on their rights, stop them from being in the public sphere in order to stop them before they get us. And Michael Knowles' defense from this, because he has talked about this afterwards, because some people have said this sounds like genocide talk, and I'm going to be honest, it does. I try not to be super hyperbolic when I talk about this. He's not talking about putting them in camps, he's not talking about killing them all, but he's talking about the type of stuff that is in lead up to that. Because his response to this is, I'm not saying kill transgender people or eradicate trans people. I'm saying eradicate the transgenderism that makes them trans in the first place. You could just like replace a few words here. It's like, I'm not saying get rid of gay people. I'm saying get rid of the homosexuality that has corrupted them. Yeah. The problem is, though, that homosexuality is a deep part of a gay person. You can't just remove that. The problem is, though, gender dysphoria is not a switch you can just go like and like switch it off. It's not something you can just, it's gone. So in order to eradicate trans people from public life entirely, we either need to put them into a permanent state of gender dysphoria where they feel super uncomfortable, and suicide rates skyrocket higher than they have ever been in the last 5-10 years as they started to get more and more treatment, or you have to eradicate them. And he isn't publicly saying eradicate them as in physically go kill them. Boy howdy, I do think he knew type of feathers this was going to ruffle. And this is the thing that really gets me, is that now afterwards he's playing the victim. He goes on a stage, Michael Knowles, he says we need to eradicate trans people from public life, and then afterwards he plays the victim saying, oh my god, I can't believe all these trans people are saying that I sound like a genocidal maniac. He knew exactly what he was doing. It's the same reason why that woman from the Daily Wire is now pulling out of the Daily Wire in reaction to this. If somebody can link me the article about that, I would really appreciate it. It's because they knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing, and now he's playing the victim. If I went on a stage and I said, all Russians are barbarians, and and I started going on some rant, right? Whether or not I was right or not, of course I would not be right in that instance. You could not get me to be like, oh, I didn't know that was going to ruffle some feather. Like, oh, I can't believe everyone's so offended. Like, he knew what he was doing. And there's nothing that is more aggravating to me is that when somebody goes out in public and does something to get attention, and then they get that attention they ordered, and then they look around so confused, like, what the all I said is we needed to eradicate trans people from public life. It's unbelievably childish. Let's move on to the next clip, though, because Charlie Kirk decided that it'd be a good idea to joke about this moment on his show instead of confronting him on the fact that he's saying we need to trample on the rights of others. Let's listen to it.
People say, how do we get our country back and all this? You need young, articulate, entrepreneurial truth tellers that are empowered to push the status quo, to push tired old dogma, and you're going to start to see legislative wins and courage happen because of it. I've said this before. The media hates when I say this. Politicians are only reading off the script that we give them, and the script is largely made sense of by articulate, podcasters or radio show hosts, Tucker Carlson, Michael Knowles, Candace Owens, Shapiro, Walsh, and all of a sudden now Tennessee has accomplished something that would have been a pipe dream a couple years ago. We went from a conservative movement that was afraid to do bathroom bills in Indiana and North Carolina to now banning the medical mutilation of children. What changed? What changed is now the people who are that are communicating the truth are no longer just the talking heads on TV. There's a new generation of truth tellers, and it has liberated the conservative movement. Michael, we're out of time. Best of luck on your genocidal campaign. And
Thank you,
kidding,
Charlie.
Media Matters. I'm kidding.
So, again, instead of taking the moment, if any of you thought maybe there would be like some big conservative backlash to this, there wasn't. There was like like Charlie Kirk here joking about it, laughing about it, and I like edgy jokes. Edgy jokes are fine. But edgy jokes cannot replace valid critique of somebody going too far. I mean, it's not even a question of going too far. The entirety of what he said was wrong, but crossing so many red lines that you need to pump the brakes before you get into a kind of like a never return zone where you say things that can't be unsaid that influence people across the board. Because let's be for real, the hundreds of thousands of people that listen to Michael Knowles, and I know that might sound surprising, but there are those many people that tend to listen to Michael Knowles. If all of them hear from him on a stage, we need to eradicate transgenderism from the public space entirely, I do not think many of them are going to sit down and be like, well, did he mean, specifically that the gender ideology needs... No, that's not... I don't think we are 100%... And that's already wrong, but I'm not going to take that as a given that they're all going to be able to interpret Michael Knowles' statement in the most milquetoast way possible in order to dial it down from what was originally said. Also, Charlie Kirk is kind of giving the game here pretty obviously that they need to set the dialogue, that conservatives have some degree in the last few years acknowledged that policy is somewhat downwards of culture. They need to affect the culture. They need to affect the dialogue in society if they want to end up impacting the policy, if they want to be able to pass these bathroom bills, if they want to be able to pass these bans on gender affirming care for minors, if they want to. This is Michael Knowles trying to push it even further, trying to get to an even further extent, trying to eradicate transgenderism from public space, trying to attempt to make it so America either makes all trans people go underground, flee the country, or just go in the closet forever, which is what would happen. You're not going to eradicate transgenderism any more than you can eradicate homosexuality. It's impossible. Many countries have done it or tried to do it. All of them have failed. Anyway, let's move on, because sadly, Michael Knowles is not the only one who has been going a little crazy on the statements recently. Matt Walsh decided that he was going to come out and talk about the possibility of having a trans child. And instead of being like, look, at the end of the day, they're a child, we love and support them, and you know, we guide them through these adventures with God, whatever you would expect that type of statement to be. He instead says that having a trans child is a fate worse than death. Listen to what he has to say.
Really, it's what you said, the mutilation of the truth, which I like that. I might steal that line. I don't know. I hadn't thought of that yet. But to me, that's the starting point. And that is the most important thing. And all the other stuff grows from that root. Once we abandon truth as a society, then, you know, then all bets are off. And the whole reason why, you know, the reason why it's terrible to do this to a child, the primary reason, like why is it a terrible thing to try to turn a 15-year-old girl into a boy? Well, because it's not possible, because she can't be a boy. She's not.
I like the idea that it's like you go out and you try to change them, as if parents like one day was like, come over here, Jessica. You're Jonathan now. Just like you got to sign the trans contract. We're recruiting you into the army. I'm sorry, it's mandatory. It's the state of California. You don't really have any option here. Like you go in and you make them as if they aren't already themselves, and then they go out and seek treatment.
So that's what makes it mutilation. That's what makes it's not medical treatment, it's mutilation. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because it's not true. So I think that's the starting point for me. It's just like, this is not true. It's not true. And that's why it matters. The thing that makes it really personal for me is the way that kids are affected by it. I have 6 kids. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we homeschool them, and my oldest kids are 9. So it's still relatively easy to shield them from a lot of this craziness. But eventually they're going to end up in the world, and they're going to be subjected to this. And I hear from parents all the time, just these horror stories of, you know, I raised my kid, I did everything right, I even homeschooled, I did whatever. And then one day my daughter at 16 comes home and declares that she's a boy. And from that moment, it's just, she is devoured by this cult almost overnight and becomes unrecognizable. She wants nothing to do with us anymore. I've heard this story so many times. And it's terrifying. It's horrific. You know, it's, I think as a parent, it's like a fate worse than death in a lot of ways. You're losing your child. It's like a death of a child while they're still alive. And so that's what makes it.
So the thing that really gets me about this rhetoric is that from all my conversations with trans people who ended up leaving their homes, or they don't have relationships with the parents anymore, he portrays it, and I assume this is how the parents have talked to him about it. Obviously, I don't know every individual instance, as in the kid's like, I don't like you anymore, Mom. I hate Jesus, and I love Satan and hormones, and like goes off and like does hormones. It's like, I'm a woman now because I like the color pink. It's like that's the way it's portrayed. It's not portrayed as in, this is something that they've struggled with since they were young. This is something that they tried to push back and deny forever, and they tried to replace these feelings with their faith that their parents introduced to them, but eventually it was not enough. They opened up to their parents reacted negatively to it, and they either kicked them out of the house, or due to their parents' lack of support, they decided they had to go their own way and discover themselves. That's not the way he describes it. He describes it as if they've joined a cult, that they haven't, you know, gone out there and found, look, this is the best way I'm going to put it. If you don't support your children, if you do not display to your children that you love them and you're going to support them as they discover who they are, ultimately they're going to go find somebody who will love them. They're going to go find somebody who will support them. You can you can call it whatever they want. But if I came home one day and I was told by my family that they don't accept the fact that I like men, or that I was in any way queer, ultimately I would go find other people who would love me for who I am, because I would rather go through that pain for however long period of time, that disconnection through my family, it would be extremely painful. I'd rather go through that now than go through the pain of the rest of my life not being who I really am, and living a life completely devoid of meaning, devoid of fulfillment, devoid of the love that I was truly seeking. Which is what you're asking a child to do. Talk about the death of the child. Is it not a death for them to not be who they are, to be a fake person, to wear a mask for their whole life. Maybe it's not a death, but it's almost like living like a zombie, living like a completely different person. And putting somebody through that, unbelievably horrific. I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. Very interesting how he portrays this here. And I also just want to mention that if we find out one day that Matt Walsh's children are trans, my God, I hope for their sake that they are not trans. Because if they are, I couldn't imagine the way that they would interact. Could you imagine if one of Matt Walsh's kids were trans? They go online, they see a clip like this, like, it is a fate worse than death to have a trans child. You think they're ever going to want to communicate that with their father or their mother? Or do you think that one day they're just going to like leave and be like, I'm out of here because I know this family won't support me? Or think there's no support coming for me. Oh my God, my life is over. Trans and my family will hate me. I'll have nowhere to go and I'll be home. And they're going to go into a depressive spiral. Saying stuff like this is a death trap in waiting for one of their children if they did end up being trans. I couldn't imagine saying something like this online about my children, about anyone's children. Oh my goodness. Fuck, man, Matt Walsh is a cunt. Okay, let's wrap it up with two last clips. Nick Fuentes decided to expand on Michael Knowles' speech, saying that it didn't go far enough. He added another message that he thought Michael Knowles was missing in his speech. He said that not only do we need to eradicate transgenderism from the public space, but also he argued that we need to eradicate feminism, liberalism, and Satanism. He also built up to eventually saying that Judaism had to go as well. Let's play the clip.
To take it a step further, he says transgenderism is terrible, it's got to go because it's wrong, it's evil, it's wicked, it's harming children. Well, then in that case, feminism, it's got to go too. Feminism, liberalism's got to be eradicated. Sorry, that's gone. And I don't.
Dude, when I hear somebody say that, I just think, God, man, I hope liberalism is eradicated for that person and that person only. Because the thing is, if it wasn't for liberalism, and let's say we hold the values of Joe Biden, like say let's say Joe Biden became an illiberal president tomorrow, Nick Fuentes would get the wall. Like, and I'm not saying that to be like make a threat or anything, but like if Joe Biden decided he was no longer liberal in America and like he ripped up the Constitution, was like, this is now Mark Milley is now second in command, and etc. Like the fact that we live in a liberal society is part of the reason why Nick Fuentes can even do the job he does. And that's the thing with authoritarians who want to get rid of liberalism. Liberalism is also one of their biggest protectors. Because if it wasn't for liberalism, if we lived in Russia and I was to say something as confrontational to the system as Nick Fuentes, the system of governance as Nick Fuentes was saying, I could just end up dead in an alleyway. Like Nick Fuentes could just end up dead in some like hotel room and nobody would ever ask any questions because nobody can ask any questions, because if they do ask any questions, they're going to end up just like Nick Fuentes, dead in a hotel room, falling 30 floors to their death. So every time I hear somebody critique liberalism, when I know if it wasn't for the fact we were a liberal country, they wouldn't have a job and they wouldn't be able to do what they do, I always find that very interesting.
Here, right liberalism, left liberalism, it's got to go. That's not in my vocabulary, okay? Satanism, gone, totally right now. And at the end of the day, you know what else?
Sorry, like Satan, like what does that even mean? What's Satanism? Who's Satanism? Who's pushing the Satanism? Where's the Satanism in public life? Like, is it in music videos? It's been since the rock and roll era. Nick Fuentes is like one of those anti-D&D moms, but just a little bit more racist.
This has got to go in a Christian society.
Democracy?
Well, that. It's not interactive. They're not, okay. This is a big one. This is a big one, okay? And this is going to be the controversial one, but this is the one, this is the only one that hates Jesus in the world. Not Hinduism, not Islam, not Buddhism. But the other thing that's got to go from the public life at the highest levels is this Talmudic Judaism.
And there it is. When you start talking about eradicating this group, eradicating that group from the public space, eradicate this, eradicate that, it's not going to be that difficult for people to pick up your rhetoric and then use it to be like, not only should we eradicate the transgenders, eradicate this, eradicate that, eradicate, and then you have a whole list of people now that you're going to be doing away with. And and now you've started the first step to a long step towards some of the worst atrocities humanity has ever seen. Thank you, Michael Knowles, for giving this up and coming kid some ideas. Congratulations, great job, man. My goodness, my goodness. And also, I mean, when you think about, like, if Michael Knowles was to confront Nick Fuentes on this, like, hey, don't say this, he'd be like, look, I never said the Jews. I didn't say eradicate the Jews. I said eradicate Judaism, just like you said. You didn't say eradicate trans people. You said eradicate transgenderism. Anyway, moving on, I want to wrap up with this to also show that for the few people who are out there and are still, like, let's say queer, they're queer and they have aligned themselves with people like Michael Knowles, with people like Matt Walsh, or people who we know not have the best interests of the queer community at heart. I do want to show you guys an example of somebody in the queer community who is in the MAGA movement and has finally ran into that wall of realization that, oh, these people fucking hate you. So this is a drag queen that went to CPAC. Their name is Lady MAGA. They've been a part of the MAGA movement for probably like 4 or 5 years now. And they were going to CPAC to spread the news of Trump, right? Now, this isn't somebody who participates in, you know, Drag Queen Story Hour or does any anything. And not saying Drag Queen Story Hour is sexual, I think, but or goes off and does any sexual drag shows. They just go to Republican events dressed as Lady MAGA. That's it. And they say, yay, Trump. That's all they do. It's the least confrontational to Republicanism form of drag you could possibly imagine in your mind. But Lady MAGA made the mistake of trusting people like Matt Walsh with their dignity. And Matt Walsh responded saying, absolute embarrassment. You are not a conservative if you're fighting to conserve perversion. That shouldn't need to be explained. To be clear, when you listen to Matt Walsh talk about drag shows, when you listen to all these people talk about drag shows, the idea was always drag shows around children are the problem, because gender bending in front of children is sexual somehow, right? Anyway, not saying that there can't be a sexual drag show, but gender bending in and of itself is sexual. I could point people to a lot of, like, maybe, like, you know, Japanese art and forms of drag and history, like Miss Doubtfire. Like, I'm pretty comfortable showing, like, you know, a 12-year-old. Anyway, moving on. Perversion. The gender bending here in and of itself is the perversion. Therefore, Lady MAGA tries to bring themselves into the movement, tries to be as accepting to their values as possible, tries to be as nice to their values as possible, but they're still going to be on the chopping block, okay? And I hate to make comparisons to the Nazis, because I try not to be extremely hyperbolic, but, you know, there's always an Ernst Röhm, right? There's always an Ernst. People who put all the chips on the table thinking that, you know, they think you're one of the good ones, but at the end of the day, this is still how they view you. And this is how Lady MAGA responded to Matt Walsh. Groveling on their knees. Matthew, I buy your books for family members. You're great. I know what a woman is, but I'm a theatrical chap. All things can be used for good or evil. My classy artistry frames vital issues in a compelling way that you cannot. Carry on, bro. This guy literally said, I hate you and you're perverse for wearing a dress. And they responded, I love you. You're too stupid to be helped. Very sorry. Sorry.